Welcome back to our series on Proverbs, Pursuing the Path of Wisdom. We've been talking about wisdom. Wisdom is what we need to navigate the complex realities of life. Wisdom is always knowing the right thing to do in every situation, even when you don't have a commandment or the moral rules don't apply. And one thing that's going to get in the way of living a life of wisdom would be the lack of self-control. That's what we're talking about today, self-control. If you don't have self-control, you won't live a wise life, and you won't be able to make wise decisions, and you're going to make a mess out of your life, and you're going to make a mess out of the lives of people around you. So what is our problem with self-control? We're going to look at the problem of not having self-control. Our verse is from Proverbs 25, verse 28. It says, like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control. So a person who lacks self-control is like a city that's had its walls broken through. A person without self-control is like a city without walls. Now, of course, we're talking about an ancient city in those times. And in ancient times, a city without a wall was a disaster waiting to happen. You just couldn't have civilization. You couldn't have life back then. You needed to have the wall. The wall is what enabled you to have an economy. It enabled you to have a justice system. It enabled you to have peace and order, law and order, peace and security. If the city had walls, you could have a prosperous economy because there'd be food for you to eat and to trade and to buy and to sell. But if you didn't have walls, what would happen? During harvest time, raiders would come in and they would take everything, so you would not have food to eat or to sell or to make a living. You would have nothing to support you as far as an economy. Walls created security. So with walls, you didn't have to worry about it. You would have, there'd be food to eat, there'd be food you could buy, there'd be food you could sell because you had that walls. You had an economy to support you because you had walls to protect it. Without walls, civilization falls apart, and then everyone is scrambling for survival. With walls, you can have a justice system. You can have some version of law and order, some kind of peace and security. See, without walls, without that peace and security, without that safety, disputes and conflicts would be settled by blood feuds between families and clans in all kinds of different ways. No security, no peace, but with walls, you could have some kind of a justice system. You could take your complaints and your disputes to a council who would give a decision, and there'd be some law and order around that. You'd have a justice system. Without walls, civilization falls apart, and everyone scrambles for survival. So the verse says that a person without self-control is like a city without walls. So what's that saying? Well, for example, a glass of wine is a wonderful thing. But if your desire for that glass of wine becomes, if that becomes the main way that you deal with life, then the desire for that glass of wine becomes disproportionate. It becomes out of control. And what it starts doing then is it starts then pushing out all the other more important things that are there in your life, and your life spins out of control. But it's not just true with a glass of wine, it's true with anything. If your desire for anything, good things and bad things, if your desire for anything becomes disproportionate or out of control, it's going to squeeze out all the other more important things that should be in your life. And your life starts spiraling out of control. And so without self-control, you're like a city without walls, because you're defenseless against the chaos that's inevitably going to come pouring into your life. So no self-control equals no walls, equals no defense against the enemy coming in. No defense against all the temptations that are going to come flooding into your life to try to pull you away from God. No defense against alcohol abuse, pornography, gambling addictions, anger issues, greed, and on and on. No self-control is like a city without walls. And we become defenseless against all the dangers, all the temptations, all the evil that comes pouring into our lives. Self-control is the ability to recognize and choose the important thing over the urgent thing. Because you want the most important thing the most, and you want the less important thing the least. So for example, if you give in to your physical appetite to eat things that are ruining your body and ruining your health, when it's obviously more important to take care of the health of your body than it is to satisfy physical desires, your life is going to start getting ruined. Your life is going to start spiraling out of control, falling apart until the doctors demand that you stop doing that, or until you die, whichever comes first. Or let's say your tongue is out of control, your mouth is out of control, and you lash out in anger. So you have no self-control, and your tongue's out of control, and you lash out in anger. Well, what's going to happen? You're going to ruin relationships, which are obviously more important than your need to vent your anger. Or if you satisfy sexual urges at the expense of your conscience or your relationship or your marriage, you're choosing the urgent thing over the important thing. And what's happening then is your desires are out of whack. They're out of order. Your desires aren't ordered the right way. And so your life is like a city without walls, defenseless against the chaos that inevitably is going to come pouring in. So without self-control, our lives are out of control. Well, certainly with all the classic addictions, drinking, drugs, gambling, anger, abuse, sexual addictions, eating too much, not eating enough, all those kind of things. But our lives are also out of control with maybe we'll say the more subtle things. Like our tongues are out of control. And so we ruin relationships by the things we say because we just say whenever we want to say them. Or time is out of control. Your time is out of control. So you keep making these commitments. You keep over-committing yourself, commitments that you can't keep. And so then you don't show up and you let people down. Or your attention is out of control, so you can't stick with something all the way through to the end. Or your thoughts get out of control. And so when our thoughts are out of control, we can't stop the anxious, fearful thoughts we have. We can't stop the jealous thoughts that we have, and those start taking over. Or our spirit, the Bible talks about how our spirit just gets out of control, meaning we make poor, impulsive decisions. We make poor decisions, and then we wonder why we did that. We're not in control. We've lost self-control. And so maybe you don't have an addiction of some kind, but everybody is out of control somewhere. Even if it's just a little place. Everybody is out of control somewhere. Here's the thing. You don't need to be a city without any walls. They don't need to be like Jericho, like all down, right? You don't need to be a city without any walls. There just needs to be one little breach, one little opening, one little part of that wall missing, because a whole army can come pouring through it. We're all out of control somewhere. So how do we pass that wall? How do we get self-control? Our next verse, the one that gives us more of the solution, is Proverbs 18, 10 and 11, especially verse 10. The name of the Lord is a fortified tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it a wall too high to scale. So like a city wall, a tower represents security. So you're looking for security. You wanted to get behind those unscalable walls, or you wanted to run to that unscalable, fortified tower. Now notice it doesn't say, notice it says running. The righteous run to it. So the situation here is not just, you weren't just, hey, you want to meet at the wall? No, there's a situation going on here. They're running to a tower. Why? There's an attack going on. People are running. They're afraid. They're running to the fortified tower. So there's an attack happening. And when an attack happened, everyone within like a 20-mile radius of that city would run for their lives to try to get behind the safety of the walls of that city. And if in that attack the walls were breached, then everyone would run to the fortified tower, that unscalable tower. They would run to that tower where they would be safe. Here's what we're going to draw from that. Everyone runs to something for their ultimate security. Everyone runs to something for their ultimate security. Now, verse 11 says that the rich think that their wealth is that fortified tower, that wall that is too high to scale, that security that will keep them safe. And so everyone has something. Everyone has a tower, a wall, their place of ultimate security, that they go to that place or that thing and they think, I'll be safe here. If I just have that, then my life will be okay. Then everything's going to go all right. But that's the problem with imaginary towers. Real towers offer security. But the problem with imaginary towers is you think they offer security, but they don't. They can't. If you look to anything besides God as your ultimate security, what's going to happen? It's going to lead to addictive patterns. In fact, this is how all addictions begin, right? Addictions begin when we do something or we use something that we believe will relieve some kind of pain or distress. But eventually, using that thing or doing that thing will begin to create its own new additional problems and pains and distresses. And so what do? Well, then we just start doing more of that thing that happens to be causing that new additional pain and stress. We start doing more of that thing because we think, because that will then cure that new additional pain and distress. But of course, since that's the thing that's causing the new additional pain and stress, it just, obviously, it's going to make it worse, and now we begin spiraling out of control. Whatever gave us that original relief or that original high, we go back to that for the same good feeling, but our bodies have this ability to adapt and to tolerate and to get used to things, and so it takes more and more of it, and we never do get that good feeling. So you need more and more of that substance or more and more of that activity to get less and less of that good feeling. And that's how we spiral out of control, because we're looking to things to give relief and high and joy and all of that aren't designed to do that when there's someone who can. And so we spiral out of control. That's exactly what's going to happen. That's exactly what's going to happen if we put anything in the place of God. If anything but God is the unscalable tower that you run to for safety or security or relief, your life is going to be out of control. It's going to be out of control. So what should we do? What should we do? How do we get self-control? What should we do? Our verse tells us. Run to the name of the Lord. The verse 10 says, the name of the Lord is a fortified tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. This is real. Run to the name of the Lord. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. Run into that tower. Run to the name of the Lord. How do we run to the name of the Lord? Remember who he is. Okay? Remind yourself of who he is. His name tells us who he is. And then, let his love change your heart. So the name of the Lord is his nature. It's who he is. In the Bible, your name wasn't just a label. Okay, your name described who you were. Think about it. Abram was called Abraham, father of many nations. Simon was called Peter, the rock, because of his rock-solid faith. Your name described who you were. The name of the Lord describes who he is. Loving, faithful, forgiving, wise, holy, perfect, eternal, unchanging, all-powerful, gracious, merciful. Friends, run to the name of the Lord. That's who he is. Remind yourself who he is. Here's an example. Luke chapter 8 tells us about a day. Jesus was in the back of the boat. Jesus was sleeping, taking a nap in the back of a boat when a storm came up. Well, the disciples all panicking with fear over this storm. Fishermen panicking with fear over this storm. Jesus gets up, calms the storm, and then he addresses their lack of self-control. He asks them, "Where's your faith?" That question means, in other words, you have faith. Where is it? Where is it? You know who I am. You know who I am. You've seen what I can do. You've heard me tell you that I am going to take care of you. You think this little storm can get between us? You lost your self-control. You should have run to the name of the Lord. You should have reminded yourself of who I am. Run to the name of the Lord. Remember who I am. So that's the first way we can run to the name of the Lord. Just whatever's going on, remind yourself the truth of who God is. Because he is our ultimate reality. That tower is real. He is our ultimate reality. Not what our feelings or our culture or the news or the social media or anybody says. Because lots of voices are going to tell you all kinds of different things. So you and I, we need to keep reminding ourselves of the truth of who God is. So, all right, so what can help us do that in the long run? What can help us do that? Because we're going to forget. So what can help us do that in the long run? And that's the second part of running to the name of the Lord. Let love change your heart. The name of the Lord, that means we don't have some vague impersonal force as our God. He's a person. He's a person. He can talk. He can communicate. He has a mind. He has a heart. He's a loving person who's compassionate and gracious and forgiving. That's what his name tells us. You can have a personal, loving relationship with him. So self-control comes from what you love the most. You're always going to do what you most want to do. You're always going to do what you most want to do. So am I. Well, when you're in love with someone, you will want to do anything for them. Example from Genesis 29. Jacob falls in love with Rachel, like really in love, all in. And he was so in love with Rachel that he agreed to work for 7 years for her. And yet those 7 years that he worked for her just seemed like a few days. They just went by like that because of his love for her. You talk about self-control, right? Sticking with it all that long. And yet the point is, to Jacob, during that long time, it didn't seem like he was exercising self-control because it wasn't awful and it wasn't tedious and it wasn't grueling. He was probably smiling and whistling for 7 years. He worked 7 years for Rachel, and yet it seemed like a few days because of his love for her. And so because he loved her, all the other desires of his heart were mastered. There's a love that lines everything up. And that love changes our hearts and our minds and our lives. And self-control will come when you love God the most. I don't know if it came through, but that's what we're teaching the kids. Self-control will come when you love God the most. Just if you remember one thing for today, just remember that. Okay? Self-control will come when you love God the most. So, if you are going in prayer all the time to God, constantly to get stuff from Him, well then you're being driven by, out of control lusts and desires and things that have become too important. But when you go in prayer to God, and just tell Him, listen, Lord, you have already given me the most important thing, you. Thank you. Then that starts lining up all your loves the right way, and it helps you learn self-control. So what's going to help us with that? How do we practice self-control? Here, we need a reason. We need a motivation. And here's what's going to help us practice self-control. We go to the New Testament. Titus chapter 2 says this, "For the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age." But just a minute, that's not how we always teach our children self-control, is it? We haven't always taught our children, and those we mentor, self-control through love and grace, do we? Right? We say a lot of things like this, like, kid, if you don't get control of yourself, you're not going to be going to the party today. You're going to be spending the rest of the afternoon in your room. And so the kids, they get scared, and they're like, okay, and then they do what they're supposed to do, right? But in the long run, we haven't taught them self-control, have we? It hasn't taught them self-control. It gets them to the party. It makes them anxious, fearful, upset maybe. It makes them determined. But it doesn't teach them self-control, and that's not the way that Jacob got self-control. There's another way. That's what Titus teaches us. There's another way. The grace of God appeared. Now, the word appeared, that means it became visible. Well, how can grace become visible? I wonder, how can undeserved love become visible? Jesus was born, lived, died, and was raised. Jesus is grace become visible. The grace of God is the undeserved love that moved Him to save us. Not because, as Titus tells us in the next chapter, not because of the righteous things that we have done, but because of His mercy. So why can you and I run to the name of the Lord? Because Moses wanted to do that. Moses wanted to do that. I want to see you, Lord. I want to see your glory. And God said, no, you can't, because you're going to die. It'll kill you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hide you behind a rock to protect you. Then I'll say my name to you. I'll proclaim my name to you. The name of God is the presence of God. It's the glory of God. And no one, not even Moses, could approach it, much less run to it. So Moses couldn't. So why can we, you and I, run to the name of the Lord? Jesus. We can run to the name of the Lord because of Jesus. People run into the city to get security. But Jesus, when He was crucified, they took Him outside of the city, outside of the security. Why? Because all the criminals were executed outside of the city, outside of the security, outside of the protection. They lost the city of God, the place of God. They couldn't be in God's city. They couldn't be in God's presence. They couldn't be in God's protection. Jesus lost His Father. Jesus lost His Father's presence. He lost His Father's protection. He was run out of God, away from God, hung up on a cross, apart from God's city, apart from God's presence, apart from God's protection, apart from God. Apart from God, separated from God. Friends, why? So that you and I could run into the Father's arms and be absolutely safe. Jesus dying on the cross, losing His Father, suffering, being separated, had to have been incredibly difficult, incredibly hard. It must have been taking a terrible amount of endurance, a terrible amount of self-control. So hard to do. How did Jesus get the self-control that he needed to go through this and stay on that cross? The greatest act of self-control in all of history, easily, hands down, is Jesus suffering and dying on the cross for us. Think about it. He's Almighty God. He knew what was coming. He knew exactly what was coming. He could have veered away from it at any moment. He could have stayed far away from Jerusalem. And then in Jerusalem, he could have just not gone to the Garden of Gethsemane that night. And when he said his name and all the soldiers fell down, he could have just walked away. He could have left at any time. And as he said himself, he could have called legions of angels down and not even lifted a finger while they just smote everyone. He could have snapped his fingers without even a gauntlet on there and just watched as every one of his enemies disintegrated into dust. He could have popped those little nails off, floated down from the cross, and give the soldiers a beating they never would have forgotten, and walked away. But he didn't. I think the greatest part of his love is that he stayed there for us. He didn't walk away. He stayed there on the cross. That is self-control. You want a definition of self-control? That's it. That's self-control. So how? Where did Jesus get the self-control? Where did he get the self-control that enabled him to endure the cross? Hebrews 12 tells us. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. The joy? The joy set before him? Jesus, the Son of God, in heaven, has everything. He had everything. What more could he want? What joy set before him would have moved him to come down from heaven, come to this earth, and go to the cross? What that he didn't already have could have motivated that kind of self-control to go to the cross and stay on the cross for us? Friends, there's only one thing that Jesus did not have before the cross that he did have after the cross. Us. Us. He loved us. We were the joy set before him. The reason that Jesus had the self-control he had is that we were his Rachel. We were his Rachel. We were the joy that he wanted. We were what he loved. And self-control comes from what you love the most. So as you're reminded of the truth of who God is, and as that love changes your heart, friends, God will become your Rachel. You will do anything for him because you will love to do it for him. So all the anxiety and the fear will be gone. All the thoughts of I have to have this, I got to have that, all that's going to be gone because you're going to find what you need in him. For the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us. The grace of God teaches us. What does it teach us? It teaches us self-control. Friends, the gospel says you are loved. You are God's Rachel. He will do anything for you, and he will love doing it for you. So make him your Rachel. Make him the thing that you love the most when you remember his love for you. That will line everything up in your life just right. That will give you the self-control that you need to live the life of wisdom that he lived for you. And the more that truth sinks in, the more we all will learn and live with self-control. We're going to close on those verses from Titus. For the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age while we wait for the blessed hope the appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ, who gave himself for us to redeem us from all wickedness and to purify for himself a people that are his very own, eager to do what is good. May God bless us and enable us to live those lives of self-control. Amen.